welcome to our LinkedIn Live session. My name is Catherine and I'm the Director of the Business of Data team here at Crinium. Now, before we dive into what's going to be an absolutely brilliant discussion, just a few points to note. Now, firstly, we don't produce live content for our own benefit because it is far more stressful than a pre-record. But the reason we do it live is so that you have the chance to ask your questions, pop in your thoughts. I've got the live stream over to the side of me, so if you see me looking across, it's because I'm reading all of your comments and thoughts as well. So please do get those in throughout the entire session. I am really looking forward to asking the panelists your questions. Now, this conversation is all about the government and public sector, and we've brought in some fantastic experts to have this discussion. And I'm going to bring up my wonderful panelists right now. So welcome to everyone. So lovely to have you here today. So let's do a round of introductions to kick off. So Ed, welcome. If you'd like to give us an intro, please.
Yeah, hi, good morning, or hello, everybody, whatever time of day is, wherever you are. I'm Ed Krafser. I'm Director of Data Analytics within the Office of Investigations at the General Services Administration, Office of Inspector General. We're an independent unit responsible for detecting and preventing fraud, waste, and mismanagement in the General Services Administration's programs and operations. So that's a big agency in the government, which largely centers on real estate, acquisition, and technology. And our mission in the IG is to help the GSA carry out its responsibilities and protect public interest. Specifically, my unit supports the Office of Investigations, which is responsible for criminal and civil investigations.
Fantastic. Ed, thank you for joining us. Welcome today. Ala, welcome. If you'd like to give us an intro, please.
Thank you, Catherine. My name is Lovett. I am the Chief Data Scientist for the New York City Council. The New York City Council is a legislative body of the New York City government, meaning that we are in charge of writing and passing legislation governing New York City. And I head the data team, which works very closely with the attorneys and the council members to generate legislation by using data-driven facts and understanding what's happening on the ground in New York City. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Carlos, welcome. Always great to see you participating within BOD. If you'd like to give us an intro.
Yes, absolutely. Great to hang out with you, Catherine. And I am Carlos Rivaro. I am the Chief Data Officer for the Commonwealth of Virginia. We are a state government entity dealing primarily within the executive branch. But as I mentioned earlier to my colleagues, we do have a lot of interaction with our legislative branch. I oversee the data analytics and data sharing and data governance for 63 executive branch agencies, as well as 133 localities across our great state.
Fantastic. And last but certainly not least, Don, welcome to the panel. If you could give us an intro.
Absolutely. Good morning, all. I'm Don Lovett. I'm the former CIO of the Office of Contracting and Procurement in the DC government. Whether or not that's a state or a municipality, I guess that remains to be seen. But in the scope of duties, there is a lot of data handling that takes place with external parties such as the vendor community and the public at large as the agency strives to make procurement open, transparent, and fair to the DC government and for the suppliers and vendor industry community.
Fantastic. Thank you, Don. And it's also worth mentioning that we were due to be accompanied by Jennifer Lambert from the Department of State today, but unfortunately, due to some personal circumstances, she wasn't able to join us. So we're wishing you well, Jennifer, and we can't wait to catch up with you very soon as well. So as we can tell from those introductions, we have a very diverse group here in a sense of experience and insight. So I'm really excited to ask these questions that we've got fully prepared. But as I said, we are excited to ask your questions as well. So please do get those in. I'll be happy to ask the panel those once you send them. So the first question I want to ask is where you are on your journey. Are you embedding data and insights into everyday decisions, or is it just a resource for analytics teams and IT? So Ala, I'll come to you first for that one.
Right. I guess for me, that's an easy question. We're definitely trying to actively use data to drive our decision-making process in many ways. And it actually isn't limited just to the use of data. We try to infuse scientific thought processes in how we think about legislation. And this could be applied in many facets. So the simplest way we do that is by analyzing data on New York City to understand what's happening on the ground. And that can very easily help us identify the root sources of problems that we're seeing that generally we need to address, often with legislation somehow. Other times, how do you request data and get high quality data? That's actually not very trivial. It requires a lot of thought. And so that's where scientific thinking and, understanding statistics and data collection processes comes into play.
Fantastic. Thank you for kicking us off. Ed, how about you? What does that look like for you? Are you embedding it into everyday insights and decisions, or is it more of a resource?
Absolutely, yeah. Data and data analytical methods and analysis is absolutely becoming more baked into everyday decision making. Increasingly, investigations are driven by the analysis of data. So the leads that result in investigations are more often or increasingly the result of data and data analytics. The volume of data that needs to be assessed in the course of an investigation increasingly requires the application of data analytics methods. The number of systems and the volume of data generated by these systems only continues to grow. However, it's always important for us to note that the data analytics doesn't prove fraud, waste, or abuse. Cases are made by traditional law enforcement and investigative methods. The data analytics helps drive the traditional investigative choices that are made by agents. So that's an answer that sort of tends towards the field. But in headquarters as well, is we're able to develop and access better sources of data, then in headquarters sorts of decisions, we can make better data-driven decisions in a similar manner.
Absolutely. I think that's so interesting you say that it is a continuous journey, that the better data sources you get your hands on, better decisions you're able to then make, or rather more informed decisions. Carlos, how does that look for you over at the Commonwealth of Virginia?
So for us, it's very simple. The value proposition of leveraging data as an asset isn't realized until it's put in the hands of the decision makers, right, as intelligence products. If you're not delivering intelligence, actionable intelligence to your decision makers, whether they're at the operational, tactical, strategic, or executive levels, then what is it all for? And so that's the philosophy that we have in state government, where all of the frameworks and all of the architecture and all the infrastructure that we developed is really geared towards that, putting the intelligence in the hands of those that are making the decisions at whatever level of the organization they are, so that they can make the most data-driven, informed decisions possible, and ultimately resulting in the best actions for our constituents. And good examples of that are our FACT project, which is our framework for addiction analysis and community transformation project, our opioid project, where we work directly with community organizations to provide them the intelligence they need to be able to have an impact in their communities on the opioid crisis. And the same thing is what we're doing with the COVID vaccination and all the COVID response, is putting the intelligence in the hands of the people that makes those decisions, because ultimately the value is generated in the business, not in technology. So getting it out of the IT shop and into the hands of the business is what we're all about.
Absolutely. I can see the rest of the panel nodding away there. So I think we're all in agreement of that. And then, so just to quickly sidetrack, Buthaya, thank you so much for your question. I will be asking that one shortly. And hello to Mustafa and Mel, who are joining us in the comments as well. So Don, how is that looking for you in your experience within your former role, and obviously your new role now, in terms of, is it becoming intrinsic into everyday decisions?
I think, to key off what Carlos said, the most important thing is to understand your stakeholder community. Really, the different constituencies have different needs for data. In a shared service agency that spans multiple agencies from a service level, it's important to understand the needs. sometimes you can lead by example. And so in creating data analysis tools, metrics, dashboards, things that are approachable in the IT area, we were able to demonstrate the value and give people some idea starters of what they could do with their own data. Once it was moved back into the business units, we did things like create large screen monitors around the office where we would display some of the key metrics, statistics, dashboards that people were involved in. And, we instantly got some feedback. People didn't always feel the data was accurate or appropriate, and we invited them in to try to refine them to improve the data capture and use. And then once people became more comfortable that their influence was seen in those data metrics, we expanded to more time series data, and really rather than a single snapshot showing things as they occurred across time, more trend analysis and impact analysis. Really the most important thing is to turn that data into action.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask you a question about gut feeling and how you challenge those a little bit later on. But now I'm really glad this question's come in because it's not directly related into government. But I think it's fair to say that the industry you guys play in is highly regulated. There are lots of red tape that you naturally have to deal with. So I think this is a really interesting question to get your take on it. So Buthaya asks, hi, I'm a data engineer, but recently decided to create my own AI to help an oncologist detect lung cancer, and I was confronted with security problems. Do you have any advice for me? Brilliant question. So how would you navigate, you want to bring in some new innovation, AI, machine learning, or just, relevant to your own areas, and then you're confronted with security problems. How would you be looking to address those, or at least be able to have a conversation back with those who are challenging that? Who wants to jump in first on that one? Go for it, Carlos.
So I'm having this problem right now with an RPA project, a robotic processing automation project that we're trying to launch to help deal with some of the tedious nature of the work. And fraud detection and analysis is one of those things where we have a lot of the tedious work of looking at different files and being able to integrate those files and look at some of the data in them. And then, so a robot for us, a bot, would be very helpful. But the problem is that just because it works in the lab doesn't mean it works in production. We had this conversation early on, the balance between data security and data sharing, right? Or the use of data, right? Data utilization within the organization. And there's a lot of safeguards in place, and they're for a valid reason, right? There have been many instances where, security violations have created risks and vulnerabilities for the organization. So, what we build out in the lab as far as AI or robotic processing automation or whatever doesn't always translate to being a production ready asset because of the security concerns and constraints that we have to deal with. So you have to work collaboratively with your security officers to be able to get to the point where it's like, okay, where can we mitigate? Because it isn't just always no, right? It isn't just one end of the spectrum where it just says, no, you can't do it. There has to be a middle ground. And where do you find that middle ground? So it often becomes a negotiation and then a risk benefit analysis. How much risk am I willing to tolerate for this benefit that I'm actually creating? And sometimes the benefit doesn't outweigh the risk, and you have to be willing to accept it.
Absolutely. And I think, obviously, Carlos, with your experience with the opioid crisis and COVID, it's very similar in a way to what this audience member is talking about in the sense of lung cancer, where it's people's lives at the end of the day. So that conversation is a very serious conversation, as you say. Ala, did you want to jump in on that one?
I did. Thank you for noticing. So 2 things, just to start off, I'll try to attack this from a more technical perspective. I am a data scientist. My background is in physics. I'm not a data engineer. So take what I say with a grain of salt. But in general, I think the framework that you use is not going to be as important. So whether you want to transfer to NoSQL might not solve your issues. The reality is that you are always going to have security flaws in all systems. You see that Facebook loses people. So many large websites that have hundreds of thousands of employees have these deficiencies. And the problem is that technology is always growing and people are always finding new exploits in technology. So if you want to secure a system and you want to ensure that it's secure into the future, you actually have to take a proactive approach, and you're going to have to keep testing the system. You probably will need dedicated IT staff that perform penetration testing, ensure that your system isn't susceptible to DDoS attacks, and are, always on the front line of any new incoming research, making sure that they update the packet. So when you have different packages installed for whatever you're developing, you get new packages that are developed for these modules, and the purpose is to fix patches that have been exploited in the previous version. So it's really an ongoing process of cat and mouse, and you have to constantly have somebody ensuring the integrity of the systems that you're using.
Fantastic. So I hope that has given you some value there, Buthaya. And so Abbas, thanks for joining, saying lovely things about you all, enjoying this session. David agrees. Brilliant. Fantastic. So the next question I've got for you, again,
if I can add one comment. I was the CIO of a clinical research organization earlier in my career. And one of the things you have to be very aware of is there are regulatory boundaries between the clinical treatment areas and the research areas. So you have to be very respectful of those boundaries and understand what the permission data is. Even if you have some permission from a specific patient, it still may be a challenge to see it in the framework of the regulatory environment for any type of clinical diagnosis or treatment.
Absolutely. See the experience that you have on this panel. That's why it's always worth asking the questions, because you never know everyone's story and experience. So there you go. So I think this has been a growing trend, but I think what COVID did was really bring this to the forefront. And I think you'll all agree that the public are becoming increasingly knowledgeable about data. Obviously, the different regulations about data privacy, but then also, in COVID, on the news, we're talking about data every single day. So how can organizations maintain public trust in the use of their personal data? Because as we've already discussed today, it's very important towards a lot of our initiatives. So how do you balance that trust, but also avoiding that reputational and avoiding that reputational damage, but also, looking to solve these big problems and innovating at the same time? Ed, I'll come to you for that one first.
Sure, thanks. So, two things come to mind, and I think I'm amplifying Carlos and Don's earlier comments. And I apologize because I'm going to sound like I'm some sort of lawyer, which I most certainly am not. But first, I think that organizations, be they public or private, need to think very carefully about the legal framework in which they collect and maintain data, the intended uses of those data. And they should think really hard about not just the first use case, but the second and third and so on use cases for these data. And to that point, beyond the routine uses of data, I think that organizations also need to think broadly about the entire life cycle of data. I think there's occasionally this notion that maintaining data in a decentralized way is better for easier retrieval, for use from the primary user community of the data, or is in some way more secure. But I think, to use a simple analogy, having 10 warehouses built to different specs with 10 different people with keys to 10 different types of locks makes it a lot harder to validate your inventory. And if you don't know what you have, how do you really know that it's secure? So that's a long way to say that data governance and data management, I think, are incredibly important. And secondly, and this is very much perhaps my sort of IG hat on, but unfortunately, people lie. From social media platforms to applications for government programs, some people enter information into systems that they know is false, in order for some gain, be it real or perceived. And also, of course, identity theft is a real concern. Third parties might attempt to represent themselves as somebody else in systems. And I think it's important that organizations think really critically about how they verify identity, but also how and should and what is reasonable for organizations to verify the information that people enter in to those systems. If you don't have a trustworthy data intake process, it makes it difficult to have a really trustworthy, I think, publishing process.
Absolutely. It's so funny how many conversations I have that just end up being the root of governance and quality, and that's such a fundamental part of it. Thank you, Ed. Don, how about you? What would be your piece of advice to maintain that public trust in the use of their personal data?
Really keying off the data governance is a key portion. I think that's critical. I think as systems are designed, more privacy respecting features are being designed in. Things like, really distributing the data across multiple systems, which is the API world we live in. There needs to be some glue that holds that together, which is typically the identity. Back to the intent of the question, the public is more opinionated about data. Whether they're always more knowledgeable or just have strong opinions, I think is a subject for debate. But really, by protecting your reputation with good data governance policies, practices, and exercising those practices with reasonable care, I think you really position yourself to, ensure public transparency. We put together a system at the district for public transparency of procurement data, very well received. People were able to access it. And back to the earlier theme, they were able to take action based on that data by knowing which solicitations they were qualified for. So really thinking about the use cases for the data is critical.
Fantastic. Love that. So many sound bites. I know the audience will be writing down lots of notes, but that was a particularly good one, Don. Carlos, how about you? I know this is obviously very pertinent to a lot of user cases you're working on at the moment.
Absolutely. So, the way you walk that tightrope is very carefully. Of course, we have already talked about data security and data privacy and confidentiality, and the way we've done it in the Commonwealth is exactly what Don and Ed have just said. There's three pillars. There's the Commonwealth Data Trust, which is that legal framework. There's the data governance framework, which brings in different individuals from different levels of the organization to talk about those policy standards and best practices that need to be implemented throughout the data lifecycle to make sure that we are keeping our data secure and utilizing it in the way that is best fit for purpose. And then lastly, the technology framework, right? In our case, we have DataSage, our secure analytics and governance environment, which essentially virtualizes the connection between all of these different source systems so that we're not consolidating all of this data into one space at one time and having to constantly upload and maintain that data transfer process on a regular basis, but we're rather virtualizing that connection so it's on demand. Whenever a request comes in that has been approved by the data stewards for those different data elements, we are then able to pull from those different data sources, package that up, and make that available. And if it's for an operational need, then we can schedule those updates and make them available to whatever endpoint that they need. But at the end of the day, it's really about making sure that the public is aware that we are not taking their data and just automatically sharing it with everyone, that we do have a process by which we separate out identity information versus attribute information. We do all the entity matching in a secure environment in-house. We create a crosswalk table that links identifying numbers, right? Sequence numbers or unique identifiers in each of the different systems. And that's what we use to crosswalk, not the PII. The PII is always kept behind closed doors, if you will, in a fortress. So that way it's only the crosswalk table that is used. And that crosswalk table is just a series of identification numbers with no PII in them.
Absolutely. And I suppose then comes the challenge of communicating that to the public in an understandable way, because I can just about understand all of that, being that I chat to professionals all the time, but I'm thinking a layperson may not. So then the next challenge is actually communicating that really effectively as well, to the lay data analytics person. But as I say, everyone's getting a bit more data literate with COVID and numbers. The R rate is something we all know now, right? So to end on this particular point, what's your thoughts?
I really like what Carlos said. It seems like what they're doing at the Virginia Commonwealth is very good. It sounds like it's working. I just want to add to that. Sometimes data does not transfer over from agency to agency or throughout the government that easily. I can say that that's more of what the case is with New York City, and that is to protect people's rights. And that is very important because people may fill out documentation for one agency with the expectation that that agency holds that data private, and they do. So I'm going to approach this from more of a legal perspective than a data governance perspective. But I think one of the most important things is that we ensure that the data that the end user provides to the whatever agency they provide it to, whatever part of the government they provide it to, is only to use by that portion of the government, or a subset of the government, for that person's privacy and for that person's security. Hopefully that relates to the common public, but I think that's one of the issues I generally see here.
Absolutely fantastic. So remember to keep getting those questions in. We do have some time. We've got about 15 minutes left. So if you would like to ask a question, please do get them in the next 15 minutes. So we spoke about it earlier, and I am keen for us to discuss it a little further, which is the awareness that within your organizations, you're going to have senior leadership who have been in the roles for an incredibly long time. They've got a wealth of experience, and that kind of gut feeling and knowledge can't go anywhere, right? Because it's valuable. But we know that it needs to be paired with data, especially in uncertain times where things are changing so fast. And we're in, I don't want to keep using buzzwords, but unprecedented times where, perhaps we haven't seen this exact situation before. So how are you balancing that need that we need to obviously understand the gut feelings and the experience, but pair them with the data decisions? How are you doing that in practice? So Don, I'll come to you first because you touched on it earlier.
I think really you have to look at a diagnostic of what are the systems and the symptoms of potential improvements you can make in an agency. That intuition of the senior executive is very critical, but when you pair that with specific data elements and analysis, it becomes more powerful. One thing we haven't touched on a lot is the ethical challenges of using some of the advanced tools. And that's a real issue, I think, that people are starting to understand. Yes, we have this data. It may or may not be correlated based on the privacy across agencies, across different domains. But the tug of war that takes place between the data scientists, the risk management folks, and I'll include security in that team, and really the public at large, is they're looking for seamless experiences. They're looking for the same type of use that they get from a app on their iPhone that combines data from 4 or 5 different places. So I think the government is going to be challenged over the next few years to really free up some of the data cross-boundary within the government in favor of better user experiences that then allow, like, the executives to, really gain some instant information from the people that they're working to serve. Absolutely.
I think the key there is the instant information, right? It can be a bit of a process. Carlos, how about balancing, and something very interesting to raise. I know we spoke about it on our podcast episode together, the fact that your strategy and leadership could change every 4 years?
Every 4 years.
So
That's
you
right.
could have someone that's very data driven, and then the next person is not. So you're constantly, having to wrestle with this potentially. So how do you manage that gut feeling versus data driven requirement?
So you embed it within the culture. You make this a cultural attribute, not a leadership attribute, so that it is resilient to any changes in leadership The question here, though, is specifically about leadership, intuition, and gut feeling, right? And that intuition and gut feeling really is the consolidation of life experience, right? And being exposed to a wide variety of different situations where that individual has been receiving this input, has been receiving this data over many years, and has seen the patterns and trends evolve. And so the idea is to be able to take that learning that they've accomplished over X number of years and translate that into experiences that anyone else throughout the organization can also have by using the data that we're pulling in from a wide variety of different business processes to emulate those same type of experiences. So being able to translate something that happened over 15, 20, 30 years into experiential learning that happens daily through the process of integrating data and creating intelligent solutions that create and identify those patterns and trends and make them more visible. For us in the Commonwealth, it's really important to be able to connect the services we provide to the outcomes that our constituents experience. And so many times those outcomes aren't measured by those same systems that are providing those services. They're measured by other systems and other agencies. And so in order for us to do that, data sharing becomes very critical, because that allows us to connect the dots across all the different services to ultimately come up with what those outcomes are. And that connection is those experiences that those executives are having over the course of their careers. They're seeing how all of those different services culminate in certain outcomes, and being able to capture that and be able to provide that to many individuals across the spectrum, as we were talking about earlier, providing that insight, that intelligence into the hands of the decision makers, is really how you transcend that gut feeling into a more data-driven culture.
Absolutely. Culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? Absolutely fantastic. Alaa, how about you? How do you go about this challenge? Has it been something that you've regularly experienced, or has most senior leadership that you've found been quite data driven recently?
My apologies. All right, so I'm in the same boat as Carlos. We have a switch every 4 years in leadership because we are part of the elected government. So this is something that I'm going to have to deal with for the first time later this year. But so far, I've been fortunate that leadership, and not just leadership, the staff within the council all have been very supportive of data. And I feel like it's become part of the culture, as Carlos was suggesting. And so I feel that understanding the need and the benefits that data provides to the legislation that we're creating is going to be what helps just data and the use of data and the support for data from the staff in general thrive across this change in leadership.
Absolutely. Well, best of luck with that later in the year. We'll have to have another panel and you can tell us how it's all gone. And Ed, same question to you to round off this topic.
Yeah, so, I think it really, to use some catchphrases, right? It's a long game, cultural change. And I think, one is fortunate if one has senior leaders that are open to the concept of using data. And I think the key word maybe there is that it's conceptual largely for them, because the work happens in agencies really more at the micro level, right? So you can come up with some silver bullets to make a big step, but the sum of little steps are individuals who work engaged with the public or whomever they engage with within the agency. So from my perspective, something that I've always valued greatly and have worked in small enough units that I'm able to do it is it's really engagement with the frontline staff. So there's no better opportunity when somebody's onboarded onto a company, and then to keep in touch with them, ask about what we missed in the services that we provide the people in the field, learn about what we could do better. And stay humble, because it again within the IG field, right? Analytics doesn't prove the fraud, waste, or abuse. Our utility to the field is by helping them do their job. So that yeah, in a nutshell, it's trying to play the long game to change culture, to trust data, and to employ it for the overall benefit of the agency and the public.
Absolutely. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there by saying the long game. I think it's something that has to be nurtured over time, right? You can't just click your fingers and say, right, we're all data driven now. This is a data driven culture. Obviously, there's things you can do in terms of data literacy programs, which will escalate a culture. But in terms of actually having it embedded in an organization, that, yeah, the long game is certainly the right way to phrase it, I think. So for the last part of our conversation, and again, if you have any questions, do get them in now. This is my final call for any audience questions. So we've been chatting about the biggest challenges in data analytics for the public sector. And the final one that has been said to me quite regularly is identifying those data champions who are going to cheerlead your processes. Because as we know, without having those cheerleaders, it's very difficult to get that buy-in and to have that future funding for the budgets and everything that you need to do them. So how do you go about identifying those data champions in different departments that you need to really buy into your projects and products? So Ed, I'm going to come back to you for that one there. How do you find your cheerleaders?
Right. So, there are always folks who are positive and want to engage. They're easy to work with. But, in any organization, there are a range of personalities. And I'm a headquarters guy. My federal career has been spent in the headquarters units of national agencies that have people across the breadth of the United States. So some people in the field are going to question that I'm just a headquarters guy, and that's okay. In fact, I really like that because I like finding people who are skeptical and then find something to do for them. So not all the time, but often enough, if we're able to demonstrate at least the effort that we put forth on their behalf, or better yet, help them succeed in their work, then there's a good chance we have the opportunity to make that person a champion. One of the most successful analytics models in which I ever worked was a result of really just such a relationship. In my first conversation with the stakeholder, I learned a couple of things. One, that he'd been an ordnance disposal, bomb disposal guy, which kind of sets a bit of a picture, I think. And the second, that he thought analytics was really a bunch of stuff. Almost 10 years later, the model that came out of that collaboration is still in production. It's gone through a lot of evolution and has produced huge results. And that guy, you can be sure, he became and remains to this day really the biggest champion of that team. And so I say find people that are going to be a challenge and work with them.
Absolutely. And I love how you say you don't want to do it all the time, because we don't want to be around people who are skeptical all the time. But as you say, it is those people that we do really need to get bought in, right? And understanding the roots in where their skepticism comes from. And if it's a case of literally showing that data visualization and saying, well, this is actually what we're currently doing for you, and this is how we can in the future support you. It could be as simple as that. But that's a fantastic example. Thank you, Ed. Ala, how about you? Where do you go to access those cheerleaders? How do you get people bought in? And then I'm going to add on a little bit. How do you keep them bought in? Because that can be challenging as well.
Okay, this is a bit of a difficult question from my perspective because I haven't had to address this. I happen to join at a good time, but what I've seen has worked in keeping the cheerleaders on your side and convincing them and reminding them of the importance of data is by generating results and generating, again, going back to what Carlos was saying earlier, you need to be able to generate data findings and results and relay them, however that is, through some form of technology or not, or through some form of reports, to the leadership and show them the value in what you're bringing to the table. And that is how you keep the individuals, as cheerleaders on your side.
Fantastic. I love that. How about you? Again, with the context of you having a potential new cheerleader every 4 years, what's your experience in this?
So one of the key attributes I've asked all the time, what is one of the key attributes of a CDO? And that is to build relationships. As Ed and Allah just mentioned, you really need to work with people, and you need to be able to identify those individuals that are not just, already looking in the same direction that you are, moving in the same direction. So the coalition of the willing, if you will. But you also have to look at those that are skeptical, that have some really significant problems that you can help solve, and be able to help them with that. And a big part of this, and we talked a little bit about governance earlier, but governance, for many organizations, especially government organizations, it's a bureaucratic term, right? It's more of a, governance, really, wow. But it's a dirty word. But the reality is that governance is just getting the people to participate in the conversation at the appropriate level. And so for us, we have data stewards that are, participating in the conversation. We have data owners, we have executives, we have high-level state leaders that are involved in the conversation, but they're each involved in the right level of the conversation, so that it is not just stimulating, but engaging to them to be involved in the day-to-day operations of how we manage and leverage our data assets. So getting that engagement from each of the different constituents at the appropriate level is probably one of the best ways to start building out those relationships so they can all be your champions.
Fantastic. I love that. Absolutely brilliant. And then Don, last but not least, what's your thoughts? Where do you go to, or in your experience, where have you gone to access those data champions and kept them engaged?
Well, just to riff a little bit off what Carlos said, which I think was brilliant, I really look at the characteristics and attributes in 3 dimensions. The first is attitude. A good attitude can make up for a lot of lack of knowledge, lack of perspective, lack of context. The second one is a great aptitude. Some people, particular areas just come naturally to them. They may not have experience, they may not have training, but they have the aptitude and can rapidly grasp what's needed to really become a cheerleader. And the third piece is altitude. Depending on where you are in the organization, that may define some of the influential characteristics. I know in many commercial organizations, there are trends toward flatter organizations, but face it, the government has large hierarchies in place. So if you can find an executive sponsor at the right altitude or level in your organization, stop what you're doing, drive to the nearest outlet and buy a lottery ticket, because that's your lucky day.
I love that. And what a great bombshell to end on today. Thank you so much to each of you for giving us your time and wisdom. It's been absolutely brilliant listening to you all. Fantastic. And thank you to everyone who submitted a question in the comment section and offered your thoughts as well. Thank you so much. Now, just before we end the live stream today, just a couple things to note. Do be sure to follow the Business of Data social page so that you are notified every time we go live, and also pop across to the Business of Data platform and subscribe as well. Now, coming up very soon, you will see that we will be announcing our advisory board very soon. We extended the seats by 5 to include some additional people for different regions in APAC and LATAM as well. So that'll be coming up very soon. And we did announce this week the Business of Data Festival, which will be taking place later in the summer, and this is the first ever 3-day digital broadcast. It's going to be going global, and it's all going to be studio based. It's going to be really, really exciting, so do check that out over on the platform as well. But for now, stay safe, stay well, and we'll see you next time.